The stock metagun. Old reliable. What can I say? It's iconic at this point. And if you've played TF2 for more than a few minutes, you've probably seen an uber charge. Stock is hands down the most dependable secondary medic has at his disposal. The weapon just has no downsides. And invuln is easily the single most powerful and game-changing weapon mechanic in all of Team Fortress 2. There's a reason they had to give all the other metiguns an increased build rate to make them compete with stock at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go over the stats of the weapon first. Being stock, the metagun heals and builds uber at the baseline rates of 24 health per second and 2.5% per second, and can overheal teammates to 150% of their maximum health value. After the minimum required metabeam time of 40 seconds to build a stock uber charge, popping it gives you and your patient complete invulnerability to damage for 8 seconds. I think because TF2 has been around so long and uber has always been such a staple mechanic in the game, we tend to forget just how insane that is. Up to 8 full seconds where the enemy team just can't kill you. A good player can do a lot of damage in those 8 seconds. Of course, there are a couple of caveats to this, such as falling off the map will still kill you, uber or not, and while you can't take damage, you can still be pushed back by being shot or air blasted, potentially reducing the effectiveness of your uber push.
Scared of getting peeked by a sniper over there.
Oh, he thought it'd be so easy. He thought, oh shit. But we'll talk about effective uber charge strategies in a moment, because right off the bat, it would be negligent of me to not discuss danger levels and playstyle changes on stock compared to the other options. Being the strongest metagun charge, stock is so game-changing it should almost always be your #1 priority when playing medic. Generally speaking, the most significant advantage you can provide your team with on stock is going to be those charges, but it also takes the longest to build, so I tend to be the most risk adverse when playing with stock compared to the other metiguns. Yes, I still want to do as much healing as I possibly can. I still want to give my team buffs, and I still want to make those clutch plays and save teammates right as they're about to die. And you can and should still do all of those things when using stock. I'm just saying you should be a little more careful. Invuln is just so good that in many situations, it's not worth the personal risk. Ensuring you're reaching that 100% and using your uber charge consistently should be a much higher priority on stock than on quick fix or vaccinator, for example. Heals can win games too, but uber is just too reliable to pass up. So I highly encourage a less aggressive and more thoughtful approach to playing medic when using the metagun. And crossbowing a decent amount in casual is fine if you can hit them, but it's probably best to rein it in a bit from what you usually see in my clips. Trust me, you really want to be building most of the game. And while you're building, make sure you're optimizing it, keeping your beam on a player that allows you to get that full 2.5% per second as often as possible. So on stock more than any other metagun, keep your awareness high, spy check often, position conservatively, track the enemy uber, and don't be afraid to let a few teammates die to ensure you get that 100%. Your current level of aggression should be almost entirely based on player and uber advantages. If you have an uber or player advantage, you can afford to play a bit more aggressively in preparation for your pop. But if you know you're at Disadds, play to avoid dying to the enemy charge or numbers, even if it means you can't heal as many teammates. Since it takes the longest to build, there is more time for something to go horribly wrong if you make a single misstep or forget to check flank routes. Yet at the same time, because the uber charge is so strong, it's also very forgiving. When you pop on stock, it's almost always going to do something positive for your team, which is kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's both the most versatile and consistent metagun. However, because of that, I see many medics using the charge at non-optimal times, not getting the most out of it, or even wasting it completely. So let's dive into the strategies involved in making sure your invulns are properly disrupting the enemy team and leading your players to an advantage. So don't sit back and relax. In fact, sit up and make sure you're taking notes, because you're going to want to remember this material. You see, I used to be like you. I used to look at stock uber and think to myself, yeah, it's great for breaking through NG setups and other stalemates, getting through chokes, and making space for your team. Come on, it's stock uber. Nice and simple. And it does excel in those situations and often isn't very hard to use due to how unbelievably powerful it is. Invuln is pretty much the only thing in the game that can effectively deal with those otherwise impregnable wrangled sentry nests. But nowadays, after using the weapon more and more, and just playing medic more and more as well, I'm beginning to think the surface level simplicity of uber charge is a facade. I genuinely think using stock optimally, popping it at the correct times on the right people, is more complex, not necessarily harder, but definitely more interesting than using the charges of the other 3 metiguns. And it's all due to that invincibility aspect. Think about it for a moment. The other metiguns' uber charges make themselves extremely clear in their primary objective with the pop, thus making it very obvious when it's an ideal situation to use your Uber. Crits gives your team triple damage. It's made for killing people faster, so it's best to pop when you can kill either a lot of people or a few key people. Quick Fix heals really fast during the pop, so you use it when people have already taken a ton of damage or are currently taking damage. And the Vaccinator gives a ton of damage reduction, so it's used to reduce the damage someone is taking or is about to take. All nice and simple. And you might say to me, well, with the exception of the Kritzkrieg, all Medigun charges help keep teammates alive, which is usually what you're doing anyways on Medic with your healing. How can stock be so different? You pop it to push into the enemy team without consequence. And it's true, invulnerability does keep people alive, but it doesn't just keep them alive like Quick Fix or Vaccinator. In most situations, it removes death as an option altogether. You can forget about sniper sightlines. Spy checking? Who needs to do that? You see, invincibility doesn't lock you into a specific objective on how to use the Uber like the other metiguns. Invincibility gives you freedom. The freedom to do whatever you need to do to the enemy team in order to win the game. Now, does that usually involve killing them like you would with the crits, or keeping your teammates alive so you have a player advantage like you can do with the Quick Fix, or stuffing the enemy's push like you can do with a few well-timed Vaccinator bubbles? Yeah, it usually does. But stock can do all of those, not just one. Where the other metiguns are very specialized, stock is insanely versatile. You can become very diverse with what you do with your charges, even within the same match. I'm not saying that stock is always better than the other metiguns. It's not. You don't always need that freedom and versatility. The increased build rate, the higher uptime, or the stronger defensive or offensive power of the other metiguns may suit the current circumstance just fine or even better than stock. Yo, that poor Uber charge. However, it does mean that stock is basically always outstanding and by far the most consistent metagun across games. I bring up this difference to preface just how different I think using stock Uber to the fullest really is. I'm always very comfortable with my pops on Vaccinator, crits, and Quick Fix. At this point, it's pretty rare for me to get the feeling that I should have popped in a situation but missed the window to do so. It's also just as rare for me to pop only to realize that I shouldn't have, and it's not going to do much of anything. And in those circumstances where I use a Kritzkrieg and it's very ineffective, it's pretty apparent why. Either I misjudged the situation and the enemies weren't where I thought they were, or my patient beefed all the shots. But with stock, I'm much less confident. And it's not like I'm often wasting my Ubers. My Ubers are pretty effective overall, and that's partially due to the sheer power of stock invuln and why I think it's both easy and complex at the same time. It's almost impossible for a stock Uber pop to do just nothing, unlike the other metiguns. But because of that raw power, I just can't shake the feeling that I'm missing something crucial and could be doing even more. And that feeling has led me to become more and more creative with my stock Ubers. And I've discovered there are a lot of situations where I believe popping is the correct choice, where you aren't just simply pushing into the enemy team trying to kill them all or break a stalemate. So how do you know when it's an excellent time to Uber? And who on your team should you bestow this great power and responsibility? What class you decide to grace with your charge is heavily dependent on the situation and your desired outcome. But really, you want to always pop on the player that will do the most with it. As such, it is much more important when running stock and Kritzkrieg to appraise your teammate's skill than Quick Fix or Vaccinator. In every casual game of Medic, you should be constantly taking mental notes about your teammates and how they play, giving you insight on who you should position around because you know they'll defend you, who can't hit a shot to save their own life and by extension yours, who has the highest probability of actually doing something with your coveted Uber charge. No game state information is useless when playing Medic, and if you're paying attention to these aspects of the match, a great Uber charge can come from the most unlikely of players. So as I continue to talk about which classes are suitable to pop on in which scenario, that in no way means they're the only classes you should pop on. Casual Medic is all about adaptability and making the most out of every single circumstance. Of course, there are apparent trends and generalities that crop up, such as demo Uber's good, spy Uber's bad. But there are also going to be outliers, and finding and exploiting those once in 100 game cases is both a ton of fun and can lead to highly effective pushes that the enemy team does not expect at all. Look at this. If I was playing Medic this game, you better believe Rocky would be getting those pops.
He's overhealed now.
Oh, nice shot. Let's go.
Rocky. Oh my god, he's our lifeblood right now. Just kill everybody. Oh, he's still going. Where's this guy? I gotta see his cam. Oh my god, look at him, dude. He's a beast. He's just standing on a sentry. Yo, this guy's a legend. Holy shit. Oh my god, he puts on a show. He puts on a show, dude.
All right, disclaimer about my general opinions on Uber out of the way. In my experience, there are 7 distinct scenarios where I think it is often smart to pop an Uber charge. Let's go through them. The first is the one we're all familiar with, the classic Uber push, for when you just need to punch through a choke, break a stalemate, destroy the enemy setup, and get as many kills as you can, disrupting the enemy team and giving yours a large advantage. When playing offensively, about 90% or more of your Ubers will be a push like this, because it just works. You usually don't even need to particularly coordinate with your teammate for these pushes to work out decently well. Make sure they are loaded up and just pop the next time they peek choke. The power of Uber will compel them to go deep. During a classic Uber push, you usually just want to kill as many enemies and destroy as many buildings as possible. As such, a loaded demo man is often the ideal choice as a patient. Engineers begin trembling at the sight of an Ubered Scotsman running around the corner. But if you know the enemies and their buildings are relatively close, then a pyro or heavy can also get the job done. However, in more open areas, pyro is too short range and heavy is too slow to be effective. Most soldiers run gunboats and sometimes banners, which means they lack a lot of raw damage, but they're still never awful to Uber. And if your soldier is either running a shoddy or the beggars, then he actually becomes a more outstanding Uber recipient. The last notable class is Scout, but he's generally not who you want to Uber in order to break through chokes and strong defensive formations. It's just not what the class was designed to do, but it can work in a pinch if you're lucky. For these types of pushes and Ubers in general, I pretty much never Uber an engineer, sniper, spy, or another medic. There are situations, especially concerning Uber flashing, where you want to get those classes involved in your charge, but we'll talk about that in a moment. And please, if you're Ubering on a sentry nest or just a strong enemy formation, walk forward and hold W into it, taking the fire and preventing the rest of your team from dying or being knocked back. It makes it so much easier for your team to follow up and rush in. Here's a classic Uber push that we've all seen 1,000 times if you're a medic player. The old reliable cleaners, carbine, bushwhacker, sniper push to destroy their enemy setup. It's just too consistent and a staple of pretty much any casual or competitive game. Okay, jokes aside, I thought it was a funny clip and another example of Ubering the guy that will actually get it done regardless of what they're playing. This following clip displays almost all of the critical aspects of pulling off a successful classic Uber charge. We just finished capping first, and I see my Flog Pyro running back for some juice. Being 70% charged with a lot of enemies still dead and most of my team alive and pretty healthy, I realized that Red is not going to have ample time to set up a defense on last if we push as soon as I get to 100%. Without the time to set up a strong sentry nest, a Flog Uber should be devastating to Red team, so I immediately tell my Flog to hold back until I get charged. The demo is extremely low, but I choose not to crossbow him so I can get Uber just a few seconds earlier. Every extra second that Red has to set up reduces the likelihood of this push being successful. As I reach 100%, I tell the rest of my team the plan and encourage them to play aggressively. I turn the corner and let the Uber loose on the Flog right as I hit 100%, wasting no time at all. As predicted, Red does not have a sentry set up, and the heavy is the perfect meat bag for my pyro to get oomph from. As he pops and my Uber begins to wane, I turn to the side to check if the rest of my team is following up. Seeing that they have indeed gone deep and Red players are dropping like flies, I stay in aggressive position rather than fall back, only getting slightly behind my soldier in demo as they run onto the point to cap. Just a textbook Uber push that illustrates how to take the initiative and create an advantage for yourself and your team when playing medic and casual. You see, the beauty of invuln is that it demands respect from the opposing team, and the level of respect that it demands depends heavily on what your Uber patient's class is capable of. Not what the player is capable of, mind you, the class. If you Uber a demo man, I can guarantee most of the enemy team will back up in response. They know that if the demo man is good and they don't respect him, they will die and lose. So the second common type of aggressive Uber I employ is what I've coined the Spacemaker. I'll usually Uber in this manner when my team isn't very good and I don't trust anyone to actually dismantle and kill the enemy team. So knowing that most of my Ubers will be low quality in terms of what my patient is capable of doing, I start simply going for as much quantity as possible. Are these ideal Ubers? No, but sometimes you can use an Uber charge just to force the enemy team back enough and give your players the courage to go in. I think when it's clear one team has the better DPS players than the other, the weaker team has a tendency to begin trickling in, not taking the risk they need to, and it starts to snowball hard. So you can use your Uber to hopefully force the enemy team back a bit while also helping your teammates run in together and actually work somewhat as a functional team. Surprisingly, sometimes you do win a big fight after the Uber runs out because you effectively split up the enemy team and ruin their position by forcing them back, while your team was able to stay as a group and take that positional advantage themselves. These Ubers are almost indistinguishable from classic Uber pushes. The only difference is your expectations going into them. Out here on Dust Bowl first, my team has been stalemated for a couple of minutes. My demos have proven themselves to be less than effective with my first couple of Ubers. So I decide to change it up and pop on this heavy. And I know that this heavy is not going to kill 5 enemies with this Uber. He's not going to drop their mech. I know he's not going to do much. But as soon as I get 100%, I see that he is in a prime position to destroy the sentry and split red team by blocking off help from the right while locking their medic in the corner, forcing an Uber exchange. With pretty much my entire team actually grouped up, I make the split-second decision to just pop and let the heavy create some space for my lads rather than wait for an explosive class, which may have been the classically better option. I walk forward myself so he and the rest of my team can follow up and turn around to check on that. How deep the rest of my players go will determine my positioning in a few seconds as my charge runs out. I back up behind the rest of my players, and if we pause the clip right now, it doesn't even look like that Uber did much of anything. We killed their sentry and NG, sure. We're up a couple of players number-wise, but they still have an Uber Pyro pushing us back. But as the clip resumes, look how freely the rest of my team can now just walk into choke and how quickly red is overwhelmed since they were all forced back into a disadvantageous position by needing to respect the charge. The resulting teamfight isn't even close, and they have to give up first or risk us killing even more of them and snowballing that advantage into last. I would like to pause for a minute and bring up heavy specifically as a stock Uber charge patient. Many newer medics Uber heavies way too often. He's a great choice when all you want to do is make some space for your team, destroy a sentry or two, or stop the enemy teams from pushing in by popping defensively. But if you need to actually kill enemies, he's pretty bad in most situations. Heavy can only damage one player at a time, is very close range, and slow as molasses. Look at this game on Gorge. Tell me that isn't the perfect Uber pop. All the important players on the enemy team are right there, ripe for the killing. They don't expect a thing. We completely caught them off guard with this flank. And oh, look at that. They just walk away from the heavy. What is he going to do? He can't follow them. By the time he unrevs and then jump revs around the next corner, they're now too far away, and damage falloff isn't going to let him score any more kills. Could you imagine the devastation, the nuclear bomb of dropping on these players with a demo man or soldier instead of a heavy? We probably would have won the game right there. Even a scout or pyro would have been able to quickly kill 2 or 3 of them. No disrespect to the heavy player, it's just a limitation of the class. Heavy is too slow to be effective with an Uber charge in many circumstances. On the topic of snowballs, my third common Uber scenario is what I call a tempo pop. TF2 is a very momentum-based game, and routinely, one team wins decisively not because they are notably better or more skilled than the other team, but because they won a single fight, then carried that winning momentum forward. If the opposing team doesn't take a moment to regroup and fight again at full strength, then the currently winning team can just continue taking and winning easy fights. So when you're lucky enough to be on that team that is currently triumphing and has momentum, you can use your Uber tactically to stop the enemy team from regrouping. You're not using Uber to necessarily gain a larger advantage, just maintain your current one for as long as possible, giving you free objective time or 30 more seconds to stall out the clock, whatever you need. For these Ubers, it almost doesn't even matter who you pop it on since you're already in a winning position. You're just trying to prevent the enemy team from coming back into the game. So just use it on whoever is currently fighting and taking the most damage. Of course, power classes are always a good choice, and a good scout can be devastating during a tempo pop. In this match on Borneo, we were rolling the enemy team pretty hard and had already won a fight. We currently have a clear player advantage, but about half the enemy team is still alive and starting to set up some defenses. We probably still would have gotten this point without the Uber, but by pushing forward into them and popping, the point is 100% secured, and we are now sending the players we killed to Borneo's last spawn, delaying their setup for probably another 30 seconds or so, giving us a ton of free cart time. Additionally, by the time the enemy team does manage to regroup, I should have about 50% charge or more, which is why I often think of tempo pops as being half off in a sense. Ubers don't have to be utterly destructive if your team is already winning, because you come out the other end with a ton of momentum, allowing you to build your next charge for a while in basically complete safety. The last offensive type of Uber, and what I would say is the rarest to actually pull off when using stock solo queuing and casual, is a pick Uber, where you are not Ubering to break down the enemy defenses completely or end a stalemate, but just to kill one or two key members of the enemy team, usually their medic. Sometimes they do have a star demo man or sniper that is keeping most of your team at bay, and you know by just killing them alone, you will have a huge advantage. This is a more common Uber type on Kritzkrieg because it's made for killing people, but you can still pull it off with stock. However, the situation rarely comes up unless you can tell your teammate who to focus during the charge. You can't trust a random player to prioritize correctly in most games. This type of Uber is where Scout shines brightest. If you've ever played Scout, you know that in most fights, you can't just run in and try and meat shot people. Getting too close is usually way too risky, so you hang back and kill enemies with 40 to 60 damage scattergun shots, occasionally finishing people off with a pistol. An invincible Scout doesn't need to worry about that. He doesn't need to dodge. He can run in a straight line towards the enemies, catch them because he's faster, and pump them full of 100 damage meat shots. A good Scout with an Uber is terrifying and basically impossible to survive if he sets his sights on you. Unfortunately, in casual, you rarely run into Scouts that are good enough to trust with your charge, but when you do, please pop on them when the time is right. Other than the Scout, Demo and Soldier are also fantastic for getting a few key picks because they can jump in while Ubered, negating all self-damage and air shots they may receive. Pushing towards Barn Blitz last here, I see their medic grossly out of position, and evidently my Soldier does too, as he immediately bombs in. I decide to pop Uber on the Soldier since he's flying into another Soldier and a Scout without a buff, and I really want to make sure that medic dies. In the end, I don't think this pop was entirely necessary. There's a good chance that we would have killed them all just the same without using, but the Uber does pretty much guarantee it. And in casual, I like when I can guarantee a play going right. And with the medic dying there, I will come out ahead with about 20% Uber advantage, potentially setting up a winning push into last. Again, this doesn't happen very often, and pick Ubers are a much more common occurrence when running the Kritzkrieg, especially trying to catch out the enemy medic like this. So far, these Uber scenarios have all been offensive in nature, centered around gaining or maintaining an advantage for your team by pushing enemies back. But in TF2, you're not always on the side of the aggressors. You might be defending your last point, or just be backpedaling after losing a mid-fight hard. And there's nothing wrong with a classic Uber push through choke while defending Badwater last, for example. Trying to kill their medic before he gets charged, or taking out their offensive teleporter can be critically important and buy you some much needed time. But you need to be careful, and sometimes the best offense is a good defense. When you have 8 minutes left to defend a last, it becomes a very tricky situation. You need to win every single fight in order to win the game, and the offensive team only needs to win one. So go ahead, pop your Uber when you hit 100% and push the offense back a bit. But what happens when you don't kill their medic and the offense regroups and pushes in with their own Uber in the next 20 or 30 seconds, and now you have nothing to defend yourself or your team with? These last holds are the only circumstances where I think it's smart to hold on to 100% charge for a while, playing reactively instead of proactively. Wait until the offense pushes in with their Uber, be it stock, crits, or quick fix, then exchange charges with them, attempting to nullify the amount of damage they can do to your defensive hull. You don't need to win the fight super hard, just prevent them from winning it. You're on defense. Of course, the offensive Uber patient will attempt to ignore your Uber and shoot past you in order to hit whatever isn't currently charged. So, during these exchanges, your flashes need to be on point. Your job is to prevent him from doing damage and getting kills. So flash whoever he is targeting. However, keep in mind that flashing does incur an Uber charge duration penalty, so be careful. You don't want your Uber to run out first in these situations either, leaving you defenseless. As such, it can be a good idea to delay or milk your Uber as long as you possibly can, waiting to pop until you absolutely need to in order to ensure your charge outlasts theirs. Giving your Pyro the Uber is also very nice for defensive exchanges since he can air blast them back with impunity. For example, during this match of Sunshine, we're holding last, and I know that at least one of the enemy medics has Uber ready. If I use my Uber to try and push out of last, but we don't win the fight decisively and cap second, a double Uber charge push by their team will almost certainly result in an L. So I hold on to my charge and wait until they attempt to push. Then I use on my Pyro, completely locking out one of their pops and denying 2 demos and a soldier from doing anything at the same time. And because of that exchange, we managed to hold strong. But sometimes you don't have an Uber ready to exchange, and the fight is already going downhill fast by the time you hit 100%. In these situations, it may be appropriate to use what I call a band-aid Uber. We discussed tempo Ubers earlier, and this is the opposite. When you are on the receiving end and getting snowballed, sometimes you just need to pop to halt the other team's momentum, giving your players some time to spawn and group up, equalizing the game again. When you see your squad trickling hard, you may just need to stop the bleeding. Let your engineers actually set up again, let your demo get a trap down, anything to prevent you from being rolled completely. It's never a great Uber, but if it means actually having a chance instead of being rolled over and 2 minutes, you might as well take the opportunity. But be warned, you should only band-aid Uber if you think your team will be unable to recover without it, as it usually isn't ideal to pop from a losing position. For these band-aid Ubers, defensive classes such as Heavy, Pyro, and Demo are great choices because they excel at preventing the enemy team from further taking ground. In this clip on Process, the enemy team comes pushing out of their last with some vigor. I initially try to escape, but that gets cut off by my scout losing to this Demo. I turn around looking for a teammate and see nobody until this Pyro comes waltzing in. Thinking I won't be able to escape anyways and being at 90%, I decided to just commit. Listen, this is a dumb play. My team isn't here yet, and I'm 90 HP walking into at least 4 enemies with only a Gibbous Pyro by my side. I dodge a couple of rockets and pop the instant I hit 100%. But hey, Ubers are great at just creating chaos and disorienting teams. And for some reason, my other medic is in deep back there and actually picks their medic with an VIta-saw while everyone else was focusing me in the Pyro? What? Look, I'm not going to pretend that I'm some 200 IQ player and predicted the med pick. I was just hoping to get them off the point and maybe live myself. When my Uber runs out, I do bait this Pyro into air blasting me to safety and make it out, successfully living and stopping their momentum completely. It wasn't a good play, it wasn't a good Uber, and it shouldn't have worked like it did, but sometimes you just gotta get a little custom with it. You never know what's gonna happen in casual. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention panic pops in this video. It's the embarrassing type of Uber that no medic player wants to discuss or admit to, but we all know they're a reality. No matter how good you are, you can't account for everything, and sometimes you are surprised by an enemy and your choices are to die or use your Uber when you don't want to. Regardless of how bad the situation is for an Uber, if you know you will die, you should use. Pop it, don't drop it. At the very least, the guy that forced you to pop will now likely die, and you won't, letting you start building again once your charge ends and not leaving your team without your healing as you respawn and walk back to the front lines. You should also know that if you're closing in on 100% or switching weapons, holding down right click will pop your Uber the instant you possibly can, which is nice when mere milliseconds can be the difference between life and death. I also want to bring up how quickly you panic pop should be variable based on the situation. Sometimes I do end up dropping when I could have easily panic popped and lived, but for a good reason. If I know that the panic popped Uber will do basically nothing, and I think there is a chance that I can still live and save the charge, I just might risk it. If I die, then popping was undoubtedly still the correct choice, but the outcome of the situation isn't always clear. If you're playing and positioning well on medic, panic pop should be a pretty rare occurrence. If they aren't for you, then I recommend you reevaluate your positioning. You may want to start playing a little safer. And I'll use this part of the video to again highlight how important Uber tracking is, as most of my panic pops nowadays happen when I'm not paying attention and don't play around an enemy pop, forcing me to use in order to live. And if I didn't have Uber in these situations, I'd just be dead, which is even worse. Track those Ubers, boys and girls. So those were what I deem to be the 7 common stock Uber scenarios. I couldn't think of other situations that occurred frequently enough or were distinct enough for another category. To reiterate, we have classic Uber pushes used to punch through chokes and dismantle enemy teams. Spacemaker Ubers used to take ground and give your team a positional advantage. Tempo Ubers to keep your team snowballing. Pick pops to take out key members of the other team. Uber exchanges to halt an enemy Uber push in its tracks. Band-aid Ubers to prevent you from being snowballed. And finally, panic pops to prevent yourself from dropping and dying like an idiot. Now that I've set the stage by going over the versatility of stock and when you should be using, let's discuss some general tips and ideas to be aware of that can apply to any type of pop to make them more effective. First of all, if you're playing aggressively and planning on going deep, you generally want to get as close as you can to the enemy team without them seeing you. You don't want them to force you to use early, then you pop around a corner to catch them out. One mistake medics make when doing these classic or tempo pops is actually being too far back from their pocket when they use. Generally, it's good positioning practice to stay a little back from your teammates so you don't take unnecessary spam and give splash damage classes extra value against you. But this is the exception. You're going to be invincible, so you want to be rounding the corner right up there with your pocket, basically next to them. It's imperative so you can actually keep up with them as they go deep. If you're too far back and pop as they round the corner, the beam could break, and by the time you see them again, they're either dead or too far in for you to reattach. And if they end up waiting for you to catch up, then you're limiting your effectiveness with the charge. Keeping up with teammates is an important skill for medics in general, but doubly so during Ubers. I see 3 big mistakes repeated by medic players when it comes to using stock Uber charge. The first is medics not making sure their team is in a proper position to effectively effectively use and follow up on the Uber. If you're trying to break through a hold, you don't want to pop when you're at a player disadvantage. Even though Ubers are immensely powerful, it's not intelligent to try and turn a weak position into a winning one. Ubers are best when the rest of your team can follow up on them. So even if your demo man is ready, you just might want to wait for the cavalry anyways. And you are the medic, you can help ensure your team is in a position to follow up. Before you pop, spread some buffs to the rest of your power classes so they can go deep when you use. And please check to see if your teammate is loaded before you Uber. If you didn't know, you can see their current ammo counter when beam is attached. Along with this, don't Uber into an enemy team that is ready for it. If they have an overhealed pyro or two on the front lines, you may want to wait for a bit to see if your team can kill them or push them back first. Ubering right into a healthy pyro is an excellent way to do almost nothing with your charge. The next common mistake is medics waiting too long to actually use the damn thing. And finally, not having a clear plan of execution when they do. Please don't sit around waiting for the perfect moment to pop your Uber, where the whole enemy team is grouped up. Your demo man is right there. You have your scout to kill off any stragglers. Your soldier is waiting for the flash to bomb in. Oh, it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's not going to happen. At least not in casual. I hate to break it to you, but you won't get one of those picture-perfect scenarios even once a game. Having 100% Uber means nothing if you don't use it. If you take 20 seconds to pop every time you get your charge, then that's 20 seconds you're not actively building another one. Every 3 Ubers you use, you could have gotten a 4th. Plus, the longer you stay at 100%, the higher likelihood a drop it becomes. Of course, holding right click and popping instantaneously likely won't result in a very effective Uber charge. You do need to be a little patient. But that's where the next mistake comes in. I think most medics hold on to their Uber too long because they don't have a clear plan of action. So they're basically just waiting for a teammate to tell them to pop. That's not how you should be playing medic and casual. You need to be proactive and make the decisions. You want both your team and the enemies to be playing around you as much as possible, not the other way around. At the end of the day, it's your Uber. It belongs to you, not your demo. So you need to be the one thinking about how best to use it. I have a general rule that I have started to follow when playing with stock or crits that has helped me be way more effective with my pops. At about 80% charge, I start to think in the back of my mind about how I want to use my Uber by answering 3 basic questions. What do I want this Uber to accomplish in order to give my team the most considerable advantage? Do we need to destroy the opposing sentry nest, kill their medic before he gets charged? Or perhaps we just need to break through the enemy front lines, killing as many power classes as we can so the rest of our team can rush in. Once I have that goal, I determine which class and player on my team is the best patient for this purpose. Usually it is some form of power class or a scout, but it varies from situation to situation. Once I have a pretty good idea of who on my team can get the job done, and usually there are a few options that'll work. You don't always want to pick just one guy. I just need to figure out where to Uber from. Will straight down the middle of choke work, or can we be substantially more effective by taking a flank route first? And here's the essential part. Once I go through this in my mind, I actually change my playstyle to increase the odds of it working out. So if I want to Uber my demo through choke and take out their nest, I'll position around choke and give my demo massively increased healing priority, making sure he stays alive until I hit 100%. If you have a plan and work around it, you'd be surprised how often you'll be able to get a good to even great Uber off pretty much right as you get charged. Still, sometimes your plan falls apart, your team is all dead, and you're on the back pedal. So you do need to wait 20 or even 30 seconds to group back up and pull off your charge. But I think a great general rule to follow is if you frequently take longer than about 15 to 20 seconds to pop your Uber after hitting 100%, you should probably reassess your Uber popping standards. At the end of the day, the team that just gets more Ubers off is going to have a massive advantage over the other team, regardless of a few less than ideal pops. On the topic of doing something meaningful with your charge, a lot of medics seem to think Uber is excellent for preventing deaths. They'll wait to use until their patient has taken a bunch of damage. It might seem logical to bait some enemies into overcommitting on a teammate, save him with an Uber, and heal him up as he slays. And there are times that works well, but in general, Uber charge is best used to prevent upfront damage and keep your patient healthy rather than narrowly save people from death for a few reasons. If you pop a little early, you can rest assured that your teammate will now feel comfortable continuing to lay down fire and going deep. I can't tell you how many times I've popped to save someone, but they were already starting to back out of the fight because they were low, and now the first couple seconds of the charge are wasted.
I'm gonna milk my Uber a little bit, and now I'm gonna use it. Shit. That's the danger of milking it. He was already backing out. That would get stuffed. That's my bad, actually. Bad Uber.
Additionally, having a healthy patient means you can flash more freely and continue the fight after the uber charge ends without as much worry about your teammates dying. Sure, you can heal a player for about 200 health during a charge, but there's still a big difference between a heavy coming out of an uber at 250 health and 450 health. And of course, popping a little early prevents those awkward situations where your patient then dies to a sticky trap or sniper as they turn the corner, and now your push has been stuffed before it even began. Think about it this way. What are you realistically going to achieve by milking a tiny bit and popping a half second later? If the uber is strong, the extra half second shouldn't really matter. The fight will be won and done. The same if the uber is weak. You've already lost. The risk of milking an extra second in a lot of circumstances just isn't worth it unless you are trying to combat an enemy charge. Making sure your uber runs out later than theirs can favor you considerably. We've already talked about the freedom and versatility of stock uber and how you can pop it, but here's an important idea that I haven't seen discussed in other medic guides or tutorials. That freedom extends to you as the medic, not just your patient. During crits, quick fix, or vaccinator pops, you are usually still in threat assessment mode, looking for the next enemy that can kill you or your patient so you can respond accordingly. But there aren't any threats with stock, at least for a few seconds, which is why I love using stock uber to gain as much information as possible during the pop. I have a little routine that I have recently begun to follow when popping an uber charge. It's important to immediately assess within the first few seconds both what precisely the enemy setup is, what they are doing about your uber, and how your patient is dealing with them. In the first 2 to 3 seconds of your pop, you should be taking note. Where are the enemy buildings? Where are the snipers posted? Where is the enemy medic or medics evacuating to? And so on. You can use this information to your advantage with your next uber if the enemy team doesn't adapt. And during this time of the initial pop, it's also important to pay attention to what your patient is doing with your charge. Are they being effective or beefing all their shots? Again, the info is crucial because maybe you'll decide to uber somebody else that's a little more reliable next time around. But after a couple of seconds of observing my enemies during the uber charge, I like to actually turn around and check on the rest of my teammates. I'm invincible, so what's the harm in taking a quick gander for a couple of seconds? It's actually really effective, and I wish I saw more medics doing this. Turning around during an uber lets you know how many of your teammates are following up on your pop and going deep. Do you have backup, or is this just a two-man job? Knowing that piece of information does a couple of things for you as the medic. First, it lets you flash anyone behind you that needs it on a moment's notice, potentially bolstering your push even further. Second, and most importantly, it helps tremendously with post-uber survival. Another huge mistake a ton of newer medics make is just fully sending it on every single uber push, committing and going deep enough that unless they two-man the entire enemy team, they just die moments after they lose invincibility. Look, Team Fortress 2 is a team game. It's in the name. And as such, medic players in particular love to blame those bad teams for deaths and ineffective charges. A medic's overall effectiveness is always going to be somewhat correlated to the skill of his teammates. But I've stated, and I hope showed in my gameplay, that regardless of your team, there's always a lot you can do as a medic. Of course, we've all been on teams that just don't defend us, and we've all died in ways that felt easily preventable, and you obviously can't carry every single game, regardless of how good you are. But if you ever die post-uber and blame your team for it, come on. It's never your team's fault. You had 8 seconds of invincibility to get out of that situation. If you couldn't live, what are you even doing?
Nice caber. Lead it. Oh!
Sometimes Ubers aren't going to work out. That's a fact. Something or another will go wrong, and you'll realize a few seconds into your pop that it's just not going to happen. Do not try to save a failed Uber push. Use the last few seconds of your invuln to live and pop another day. Yeah, it's never good when the Uber you took a full minute to build is rendered useless. But you know what's worse? Dying after wasting that Uber. You should only die post-Uber if you realize the risk involved and decided to take it anyway to secure an even larger advantage for your team.
Whatever. All right, let's go fuck him up, Demo. Demo, no, that's not the way. Demo, there's a door. Demo, Demo. Over here, in the doorway. Demo, there's a soldier shooting me. Demo. Oh, he's figured it out. Too bad he's only got a fucking pen now. What the fuck?
On the topic of advantages, something that probably gives you a relatively slight advantage is Uber masking. Medic has a tendency to shout out from the rooftops that he has just reached 100%. So even if the enemy medics aren't tracking Uber, they now know that you're charged and can start to position accordingly. However, by using a voice line right as you hit 100%, you can override the typical charge callout with something else, masking and thus not alerting the enemy team to your charge. I don't really know how effective this is or how often it will actually make a difference because you can never really quantify it, but hey, it's easy to do, so you might as well mask your Ubers, especially when using stock or crit screen. Another way to eke out a tiny advantage on Medic is by always switching to stock Uber charge during setup before the round begins, especially on offense. You get a free 100% during setup anyways, so there is rarely a reason good enough to justify not using the strongest charge in the game. One of my favorite little techs to do with stock is the Backstab Denial, popping or flashing right as your pocket is about to be stabbed, leaving spy players bewildered and confused. Not always worth doing, but I just think it looks funny because the spy's always just standing there dumbfounded for a second before they realize why their stab didn't work. I'll talk more about this next one when I actually make videos on the various melee weapons, but as much as I advocate for the Saw and Vow on the other meta guns, the Uber Saw is most definitely best paired with stock and casual. Getting 25% when you do manage to slap an enemy is more valuable on stock than any of the other options, and Uber Extends, where you switch and hit an enemy with the Saw to extend your current charge, are both more potent and easier to pull off with stock due to the invulnerability. They're also quite entertaining in how clutch an extend can be sometimes. Alright, let's close out this video by going over the tactics of Uber flashing. At any point during your pop, you can switch the beam to another player and give them invincibility instead, at the cost of some of your Uber charge duration. Importantly, for invulnerability, the Uber charge effect lingers for 1 second after breaking beam, letting you have multiple teammates invulnerable at once if you keep switching targets. This can lead to an absolutely devastating attack if you tag the right people with beam at the right times. However, it also shortens your overall Uber duration. You lose half a second of charge for every second that another player has Uber beyond your first patient. The more you flash other players, the shorter your Uber will be, making it a little tricky to know when it's smart to flash and when you would rather just have the full 8 seconds. Here's my mentality when it comes to flashing. First, I need to be fairly certain that my current patient and I don't need the extra time. If I think the situation will become too dangerous by shortening my Uber, then I won't flash. Period. But that usually isn't the case. So then I just weigh the effectiveness of what my current patient is doing versus what another could be doing with the remaining charge. If I sent my demo in, but he is now piping a dispenser while my pyro actively cremates the enemy frontline, you better believe I'm dropping beam on the demo for that pyro in a heartbeat. Flashing can also be used to quickly save another teammate during the push or let them go deep. A fast flash to keep your friendly medic alive against that soldier bomb or your NG up as a sentry gets stickied is often well worth the duration it costs. Likewise, letting your soldier or demo blast jump in with a flash can dismantle the enemy's formation. In fact, it's pretty much the meta in competitive to push by starting the Uber on your demo, letting him fly in for free with a sticky jump, then switching beam over to a scout to follow him in, reflashing the demo, scout, or your soldiers as needed. Also, don't forget you get a free flash at the very end of your Uber charge. It's running out anyways, so tag another teammate with it just to give another guy invuln for a second. The duration won't really be lowered at all because you only have a fraction of a second of charge left anyways. It's just nice to get into the habit of doing that. Well, those were all the different strategies and playstyle alterations I could think of concerning stock Uber charge. I'll be making one of these videos for every metagun, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Stock really is the best all-around metagun and will be the most consistently useful across games. It's never a wrong time to run stock, which is why it's by far the most common metagun I see in casual. But don't be afraid to branch out to the other options. They teach and encourage different playstyles, making you a more well-rounded medic player overall. And if I missed anything important regarding stock, let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate it. Oh yeah, forgot to mention, Tele-Frags kill through Uber.
What the fuck? What? No.
Medic just said don't take the teleporter, and then this guy takes it like a dumbass and saves it.
Feed me.
We'll get faster, Cap.
I've got my fingers on the KYS. Ooh.
Oh, so on our roof, on our roof.
Alright, guys.
Yeah, really far forward.
We're Valley, by the way, Kevin.
Yeah, I saw.
I don't know how to rocket jump, holy shit! Man! What are these called? I'm getting
Go in, I want my soldiers in. Bomb! Bomb!
Bomb him.
Bomb, baby,
soldiers
bombing
really
in right now. God damage on combo!
Fatty damage.
Med's direct hit.
Let's use, back it out, kite it. Oh shit, he's coming.
Both soldiers dead.
He's coming!
Soldiers say kill bot. Oh my
There's her.
Soldier's dead.
I can't
He's coming, he's coming, he's coming, he's coming.
Jesus Christ.